Hello class and welcome to this Tetris Strategy guide right here on Video Games 101 by way of Let's Play with Brigands. I'm your instructor, Professor Brigands, and it's not every day that you get to do a class on one of the best-selling games of all time. I was absolutely addicted to Tetris in the 90s and then had it on pretty much every phone I've ever owned in the decades following that. Tetris is another one of those games that's pretty easy to pick up, but terribly difficult to master. In terms of difficulty, I'm going to do the same thing I did with our recent class on Dr. Mario and take the mean between 1 and 10 round down and give Tetris a 5 out of 10. On the frustration scale, this equates to throwing your controller across the room, and if you're like me, possibly shouting out, "My empire is crumbling," just as, you missed that spin at the last minute. Hopefully you're not playing this on a Game Boy in that case, as you'll probably have to buy a new Game Boy if you threw that across the room. But fear not, we've got a whole bunch of tips so that you can unlock your true and full Tetris potential. Blaze has a ranking list of the Tetris pieces, which I'm very much looking forward to, and Fluff has a number of fun and interesting facts about Tetris that will blow your mind. Let's run the intro and get into this Tetris strategy guide right here on Video Games 101. Excuse that whiteboard class low-hanging fruit, I know. Also excuse the fact that I'm going with Music 3. It's always been my personal favorite. No disrespect to the classic Tetris theme. As we take a look now at the controls for Tetris, pretty straightforward. Rotate the pieces counterclockwise or clockwise with B and A, respectively. We can drop pieces down faster with down, but otherwise just moving them around with the D-pad. As we take a look now at the Briggs notes for this Tetris strategy guide, the keys to doing well in Tetris. Number 1, don't box yourself into a figurative corner. We actually want to leave those sides open. Talk about that in a second, but keep your options open, essentially, is what I mean. Number 2, it goes hand in hand with that. Keep things as flat as possible on the surface. Number 3, build for the sides, as I'm doing right here. Basically, my strategy is just stack anywhere except that rightmost side. That area is reserved for the straight pieces when we have a Tetris possibility on the board. We do not right here, so we're just going to drop it right here. And then finally, be ready to throw all strategy out the window when things get out of hand and go into survival mode, just clearing whatever lines you can to keep your game going. So right now, things are calm. The row height is low. Our blood pressure is in a healthy range. The speed is very slow here on level 0. We have time to make informed decisions, just building up our tower everywhere except that rightmost side, which we are again saving for those straight pieces. Trying to keep everything flat, like we mentioned in the Briggs notes. Just taking those Tetrises when we can. That's clearing 4 lines, which we get the most points for. Every 10 lines, we advance the level. Things start coming down faster, and we get a nice color makeover on the screen here, which is nice. Don't have a Tetris opportunity there, so I drop that over on the left. You don't want to have too many deep holes at multiple points on the board. You always want to be able to at least fill in the holes with one of these L-shaped pieces or J-shaped pieces, but here we go. We have another Tetris we can drop right here. Nice when you get them back to back. The unfortunate thing is, in these early levels, and I'll draw that there because, as I'm about to mention, the Tetrises aren't worth nearly as much as they are in the later levels. So, we're in it for the points, the glory. We get slightly better, more interesting endings, let's call it, in quotes, the more points we have at the end of our game. But the multipliers, they don't really start to pay out until those later levels, so. And you can see right here, I already got myself in a bad spot. The reason we want to keep things flat is that so that we always have a spot for virtually any piece that they throw at us. And speaking of the different pieces, let's get a rundown and a ranking list of them with our resident item expert, Blaze. Alright, here is my ranking list of the pieces of Tetris from worst to best. So we're starting out with the ones you don't ever want to see. Number 7, the S block. Now, you're probably thinking, Blaze, that's a lot like the Z block. What makes the S block worse? Bit of a spoiler alert, the Z block is next. As the professor mentioned, we generally like to build on the right side for those Tetris pieces, which means we want to build off of the left-hand side, left to right. S block messes all of that up, which is why I slightly prefer the Z block. We can wedge these into gaps more easily on the left-hand side, build to the right. Either way, hate the S and the Z block. At number 5, the O block. A lot of folks might be thinking, Blaze, why is the O block so low on this list, or high, depending on your interpretation? Well, the problem is, O block works great when you have a flat surface, but you don't always have a flat surface. Sometimes you need something to fit into a gap that you have, and the O block just creates problems, hence its position at number 5. Number 4, the J block. Similar to the reasoning for why the S block was slightly above the Z block, which I think you could figure out the L block is at number 3. We like to build a bit more left to right. We can wedge this in at a push when it comes to working in that L block, and plus the color's a little bit nicer. Same goes for the Z block on most of these colors, just a little bit lighter, a little bit shinier. Helps me forget for just a second that my entire empire is about to crumble in Tetris and I've got no spots for these pieces. But I digress. Number 2, we have the T block. The reason I'm putting this at number 2 is because you can virtually always find a spot for the T block. You can make it flat by flipping it 180 degrees from right here. You can work it in any holes that you have in your Tetris game at that time. But number 1, you can't have Tetris without the long Tetris piece. Fits in, it's the only one which is 4 blocks in length, only one which gets that sweet chime sound of a Tetris. But there you go, my ranking list for the pieces of Tetris. Speaking of empires crumbling, mine has slowly been crumbling during that breakdown list. I do not disagree with that one bit. Yeah, prefer to build on that right side, but see the game's struggling a little bit here. I apologize, class. We are in the process of migrating to a completely new way of capturing these games, new hardware. It's going to be much better going forward. I'm looking forward to it, but right now the occasional stuttering, it would appear, so I apologize for that, but I'm going to still try to rip off a 6-figure score here. We've already beaten the top score, which is a bit of a joke, but admittedly. But we've, on the bright side, gotten our game a little bit under control here. I dropped that there so that we can more easily fit something into that little gap you can see we left for ourselves. We need a J piece, I suppose it is. There we go, we got one now. We can kind of fish hook our way in there. Still a bit of a precarious build, that helped us out. The luck of the draw. I liked kind of the variations on the Tetris game you get with future releases, where one, you can kind of shift pieces a little bit after they touch the ground. Sometimes you can hold a piece and drop it in on demand. That's a lot easier. Don't have those features in this game, but while we've got things a little more manageable here, let's go to Fluff for our first Fluff fact about the game of Tetris.
Tetris was created in 1985 by Soviet software engineer Alexei Pajitnov. Pajitnov joined the Computer Center of the Soviet Academy of Sciences at 24 in 1979 as a speech recognition researcher. He used the Institute's Soviet-made Electronica 60 computer to design puzzle games in his first years with the Institute, wanting to make people happy and afford people the opportunity to learn things about one another with his games. In 1984, he came up with the basic idea for Tetris while trying to recreate his favorite childhood puzzle game with pentaminos, or unique shapes consisting and made of 5 squares. He envisioned the pieces dropping in from the top of the screen and the player charged with the task of perfectly filling out a space. Pentaminos allowed for 18 different shapes, which Pajitnov believed was too complex for the game he had in mind, so he limited it to tetraminos, or geographic shapes composed of just 4 squares, as with only 7 combinations, it made for a much simpler game. The name Tetris is a portmanteau, or a combination of the tetramino pieces on which the game is based and Pajitnov's favorite sport of tennis. The Electronica 60 had no graphical interface, so spaces and brackets made up the pieces in its earliest version. Completing lines filled the screen quickly, so Pajitnov designed it so that cleared lines disappeared out of necessity, though it quickly became a major part of the game's mechanic. The game quickly proved to be an addictive success as it spread to every Moscow institute with a computer. The game eventually had to be banned in certain buildings as it had such an adverse effect on productivity. The game continued to grow in popularity after Pajitnov got help in porting the game to the IBM PC for its graphical capabilities, as well as got help from a supervisor in exporting the game to a Hungarian game publisher, Novatrade, while he passed off the rights to the game to the Academy due to a law in the Soviet Union which didn't allow for creators to make money off of their intellectual property. Okay. Eventually, an international software salesman for London-based firm Andromeda Software, Robert Stein, recognized the game's potential and managed to get an agreement via fax to shop the game around and begin the publishing process. The story gets much more complicated from there, as companies from all around the world licensed it, as well as fought for its rights. At one point in the late 80s, almost a dozen companies believed they held the rights to the game. Eventually, Bulletproof Software, who we talked about in our class on Yoshi's Cookie, acquired the Japanese rights, and its founder, Hank Rogers, brokered a deal with Nintendo to create a version of the game for their upcoming first-ever portable console, the Game Boy. After a whole mess of rights-holding confusion, which saw Nintendo going to war with Atari Games over the rights for the NES version, Nintendo released the game on NES and Game Boy, both of which were massive successes. In 1996, as per the initial agreement with the Academy, the rights for Tetris reverted to Pajitnov, and he and Hank Rogers founded the Tetris Company in June of that year to manage the rights on all platforms. Pajitnov now receives royalties for every Tetris game and its derivatives sold worldwide. When you consider that Tetris is the third highest grossing video game of all time, it's no wonder that Alexei Pajitnov is now worth over a mind-boggling $20 billion. Professor, maybe we should forget the whole teaching thing and come up with the next billion-dollar game idea.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it, Fluff. Thank you very much. If you come up with anything, let me know as we lick our wounds after that first game. Didn't quite reach 100,000. Let's do one more game after this. We did get to level 11. That's something. Double-digit levels. Where it gets a little crazy. But let's try one more game. Go for that 100,000 score. Maybe we'll have it this time. We'll start. I think let's just go for exclusively Tetrises as long as we possibly can in this one. That's pretty crazy, though. He is quietly one of the richest men in the world, that Pajitnov. But it's a testament to just how ubiquitous this game is. I mean, literally, every system at this point has a port, a Tetris port to it. Mention back when I had, the T9 style phones, had Tetris on that. That was probably my favorite iteration of the game because it had those features I was mentioning before. This one, it's just a lot less forgiving, the Nintendo version right here. None of those features which would later be put into the game. Didn't have much to do there. One of those cursed S/Z blocks. Probably why Blaze had him so low down on his list, because just not much you can do with them unless you have a very specific situation on your board. And we're just gonna have to, unfortunately, give up the what would have been the next Tetris because of that big old hole staring us down right in the middle of our build. I should mention, I realized I didn't mention this as we were getting started, the one setting which we didn't cover in that intro, not that there are really any settings besides the level and the music, but you have the type or the mode A and B, which you can pick from at the beginning. We went with mode A, which is just the kind of never-ending, just keeps going, adding levels and speed. The mode B is the one where you just try to get to 25 lines, I believe it is, as quickly as possible. Not quite as satisfying. I prefer the the marathon run, which we're doing with Mode A, but anyway, wanted to clear that up. And while we continue building, let's go back to Fluff.
Excuse me while I butcher this. Korobeiniki, better known as the Type A music, which was used in the Game Boy version of Tetris and is now universally associated with the game, is a well-known 19th century Russian folk song. It's based on a poem of the same name by Nikolai Nekrasov, which tells the story of a meeting between a peddler and a girl who haggle over goods as a metaphor for seduction and courtship, which, when I hear the music, I can totally believe.
Yeah, I can hear it too now that you mention it, Fluff. Russians have some interesting little, I don't know what you want to call those, folk songs. Bayushki also comes to mind, probably butchering that. I'm not Russian, but that lullaby that parents and grandparents would sing to their children and grandchildren about a wolf coming to bite them and drag them off, take them away. That sounds like what you want to hear as you're falling asleep as a child, but it's crazy Russians. But made one heck of a game, or one of their sons did, here in Tetris. Got ourselves a very nice situation here now on level 4. Always nice when you're basically starting fresh in one of the later levels. Obviously we could pick the level we wanted and start a little bit faster so that we can get more points from the start, but I like the full experience of starting from level 0 and working your way up. Trying to go for 100,000 points that way. Feels like you earn it a bit more. Every Tetris worth quite a bit more now that we're here on level 4, level 5 technically, considering level 0 was its own thing. See how much of the next one nets us. We're at about 26,000 points. You see you get a negligible amount of points for just a drop. So 26 to got about 7,000 points on that. Just keeps going up little by little with each level, so becomes very difficult to manage. We have one right here if we want it. Go for it. Very difficult to orchestrate a Tetris in some of those later levels, which is why they pay out so much more. When probably your row height is so much higher, but also the pieces are just dropping so much faster and you don't have a chance to flip them in the way that you want. Keep that side open so we could drop in that L piece right there. Halfway to our goal of 100,000 points, just under. Always nice to do a puzzle game as well, as we give Gary the day off. Well deserved. And working hard. Yeah, nowhere to put that piece, unfortunately, right there. But sort of similar to one of our Briggs notes on Dr. Mario, another game where you're kind of stacking pieces. Once you do kind of make a mistake or can't do much else in a certain corner of the board, you can just use that as sort of dump for the time being. So now we have that sort of handicap of one extra line of row height there at the bottom, but that's alright. Still pretty manageable. As we work for that 100,000 points, let's bring in Fluff for one last Fluff fact about the game of Tetris. Fluff?
File this under mildly interesting, but Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak is apparently a big fan of Tetris and played the Game Boy version addictively upon its release. He even submitted his high score to Nintendo gaming magazine Nintendo Power's Hottest Scores monthly feature, in which players could submit their high scores to the magazine to be published. After his high score of 507,110 points for the Game Boy version was published in issue 18, he continued to submit his scores, but Nintendo Power apparently didn't have any interest in publishing any follow-ups. This led a seemingly frustrated Wozniak to sneakily submit his new high score under his name backwards, or Yvette's Kainzow, a score of 546,145 points, which Nintendo Power actually published 8 months later under that name in issue 26.
That's pretty silly. Thank you very much, Fluff. Kinda makes the guy a little more endearing right there. Not that I have any reason to think that he's not, but Just goes to show everyone was obsessed with this game, as we have some patriotic colors here in level 8. I think one more Tetris will do it. We'll certainly do it. It's just a matter of can we pull it off. Just need the piece now. I think we got it this time, class. I do remember those scores, though, the high score section of Nintendo Power. Never submitted one myself. Yeah, not much we could... this would be a terrible time for everything to fall apart. So close. And taste it. I really don't want to reach that finish line just through a... Alright, this will unlock it again. Oh, we gotta fill in that left side. There we go. I didn't want to get it off of not a Tetris. There we go. 107,586. Happily take that. Let's just play out our game at this point. I suppose they people had to submit Polaroids of their scores back in the NP days. I was an avid subscriber. My brother started us off. He was a little bit older than us, or older than me. He was not older than our combined ages, I'll tell you that right now. But we're not going to last very much longer on this speed. But yeah, he started, I think, around issue 10. And then I carried on through about issue 100, something like that, through the 64 days. Yeah, this is... Our empire is certainly crumbling right here. It's just about gravy points at this point. There's not going to be very many of them. Nope, that will do it for us. Alright. 114,766. Well, look at the size of that rocket ship. Cosmonauts blasting off into space. Good times. Well, there you go. That's our time this week. Hopefully you maybe picked up a tip or two you can apply to your Tetris games. Certainly learned some fun facts about the history of Tetris. I know I did. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so to enroll in this class. We do one of these classes every single week. We'd love to have you enrolled. Hit that like button if you don't mind. Leave a comment. Both of those really do help us out in creating future classes for you. What was your Tetris high score here in the NES or the Game Boy version? I'd be curious to hear it. But yeah, that's our time. We'll see you next week in the same spot for next week's class right here on Video Games 101. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and comment on this video, and click subscribe if you haven't already, as this seriously helps me to keep making great content for you. And check the description of this video to see what song is playing right now.